Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to OneClass. My name's Kevin. Today I'm answering some economics questions. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics. I also work as an economist. And what I'm going to be doing is going through questions that you guys have sent in. I'm going to be reviewing the answers from our junior tutors, adding anything that I think may be important. That's it. So we can get started here. Looks like it's working okay. Now this first question is extremely long that one of you sent in. Somebody had to do it, so I'm trying my hand at it. Bear with me as I read this for the next 5 minutes or so. I'll add in anything else I think is pertinent as I read through. And then we'll see what our junior tutor has to say at the end. So, question is, what does this article suggest to us about how people should go about to truly maximize their level of utility from their limited incomes? And the article reads, can money buy you happiness? It's true to some extent, but chances are you're not getting the most bang for your buck. New research is suggesting that happiness is determined not by how much money one earns, but rather how one spends it. University of British Columbia Associate Professor Elizabeth Dunn explains why. It's an age-old question. Can money buy happiness? Over the past few years, new research has given us a much deeper understanding of the relationship between what we earn and how we feel. Economists have been scrutinizing the links between income and happiness across nations, and psychologists have probed individuals to find out what really makes us tick when it comes to cash. The results, at first glance, may seem a bit obvious. Yes, people with higher incomes are, broadly speaking, happier than those who struggle to get by. But dig a little deeper into the findings, and they get a lot more surprising and a lot more useful. In short, this latest research suggests wealth alone doesn't provide any guarantee of a good life. What matters a lot more than a big income is how people spend it. For instance, giving money away makes people a lot happier than lavishing it on themselves. When they do spend money on themselves, people are a lot happier when they use it for experiences like travel than for material goods. With that in mind, here's what the latest research says about how people can make smarter use of their dollars and maximize their happiness. Experiences are worth more than you think. Ryan Howell was bothered by a conundrum. Numerous studies conducted over the past 10 years have shown that life experiences give us more lasting pleasure than material things, and yet people still often deny themselves experiences and prioritize buying material goods. So Professor Howell, Associate Professor of Psychology at San Francisco State University, decided to look at what's going on. In a study published earlier this year, he found that people think material purchases offer better value for the money because experiences are fleeting and material goods last longer. So, although they'll occasionally splurge on a big vacation or concert tickets when they're in a more money-conscious mode, they stick to material goods. But in fact, Professor Howell found that when people look back at their purchases, they realize that experiences actually provide better value. What we find is that there's this huge misinformed forecast, he says. People think that experiences are only going to provide temporary happiness, but they actually provide both more happiness and more lasting value. And yet we still keep on buying material things, he says, because they're tangible and we think we can keep on using them. Cornell University psychology professor Thomas Gilovich has reached similar conclusions. People often make a rational calculation. I have a limited amount of money. It's a finite resource, and I can either go there or I can have this. If I go there, it'll be great, but it'll be done in no time. If I buy this thing, at least I'll always have it. That is factually true, but not psychologically true. We adapt to our material goods. It's this process of hedonic adaptation that makes it so hard to buy happiness through material purchases. The new dress or the fancy car provides a brief thrill, but we soon come to take it for granted. Experiences, on the other hand, tend to meet more of our underlying psychological needs, says Professor Gilovich. They're often shared with other people, giving us a greater sense of connection, and they form a bigger part of our sense of identity. If you've climbed in the Himalayas, that's something you'll always remember and talk about, long after all your favorite gadgets have gone to the landfill. And crucially, we tend not to compare our experiences with other people so much. Keeping up with the Joneses is much more prominent for material things than for experiential things, he says. Imagine you've just bought a new computer that you really like, and I show up and say I've paid the same amount for the one with a brighter monitor and a faster processor. How much would that bug you? The experiment he has run, it bugs people a lot. But when people are told to imagine they've gone on vacation in New Zealand, and someone else has had a slightly better vacation, it bothers people somewhat. But you still have your own experiences and your own memories, and so it tends to trouble you less. In a recent paper called Waiting for Merlot, Professor Gilovic and colleagues showed that we also get more pleasure out of anticipating experiences than anticipating the acquisition of material things. People waiting for an event were generally excited, whereas waiting for material things seemed to have an impatient quality. Don't adapt to what you buy. Oh boy. Stay with me, folks. We're getting there. One of the main reasons why having more stuff doesn't always make us happy is that we adapt to it. Human beings are remarkably good at getting used to changes in their lives, especially positive changes, says Sonia, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, a psychology professor at the University of California, Riverside. If you have a rise in income, it gives you a boost, but then your aspirations rise too. Maybe you buy a bigger home in a new neighborhood, and so your neighbors are richer, and you start wanting even more. You've stepped on the hedonic treadmill. Trying to prevent that or slow it down is really a challenge. One approach that can work, she says, is consciously trying to foster appreciation and gratitude for what you have. The process of adaptation, after all, comes from taking what you have for granted, so you can slow it down by reminding yourself of why you value what you have. It can be as simple as setting aside time every day to follow the traditional advice of counting your blessings. Or you might want to keep a daily journal or express your gratitude to other people. Key is to find a way to remain conscious of everything you own and avoid simply adapting to have it around. Because you're working against your natural inclination, Professor L acknowledges that feelings of gratitude and appreciation can be very difficult to sustain. If your journal or daily list becomes just a stale routine, it will no longer have much effect. You might have to keep switching techniques. Increasing variety, novelty, or surprise can also help you to enjoy your possessions more. When things become unchanging, that's when you adapt to them, Professor L says. If you keep a painting hanging in the same spot on the wall, for example, you'll stop noticing it after a while. But swap it with a painting from another room, and you'll see each of them with fresh eyes and appreciate them more. Try sharing your possessions with other people too, and opening yourself up to new experiences, she says. This could even mean depriving yourself of your possessions for a while, perhaps by lending them or sharing them with someone else. Elizabeth Dunn, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of BC and co-author of the book Happy Money, recently conducted an experiment where she sent people home with a big bag of chocolate, telling some of them to eat as much of it as they could, and others that they were forbidden to eat it. A third group could choose how much to eat. The result, the people who had been forbidden from eating chocolate were able to enjoy their next chocolate bar much more than those who had either eaten a lot or consumed their normal amount. Giving something up temporarily can actually help to preserve our capacity to enjoy it, Professor Dunn says. Try giving it away. You need some water or something after this. The paradox of money is that although earning more of it tends to enhance our well-being, we become happier by giving it away than by spending it on ourselves. That's the finding from a series of studies by Professor Dunn. She began by handing out cash to students on campus and telling some to spend it on themselves and others to spend it on someone else. Those who spent money on other people were happier than those who treated themselves. Professor Dunn has since repeated the experiment in other countries across the world and has extended it to look at whether people were still happy when giving away their own money rather than free money handed to them by a professor. She found that in countries as diverse as Canada, South Africa, and Uganda, giving away money consistently made people happier. This was even true when people were giving away their own money, and even when they themselves were relatively poor. She also worked with economists to analyze survey data from 100 countries in the Gallup World Poll, and found that people who donated money to charity were happier in poor and rich countries alike. The fact that we were able to observe the same effect that we'd seen in Canada in places like South Africa and Uganda was probably the biggest surprise of my career, she says. A lot of us think we'll give to charity one day when we are richer, but actually, we see the benefits of giving even among people who are struggling to meet their own basic needs. What moves the needle in terms of happiness is not so much the dollar amount you give, but the perceived impact of your donation. If you can see your money making a difference in other people's lives, it will make you happy, even if the amount you gave was quite small. Be sure to buy time too. It's also important to consider how what you're buying will affect how you spend your time. That big house in the suburbs may seem like a good idea, but a 2004 study by Eloise Stutzer and Bruno Frey of the University of Zurich found that people with longer commutes reported lower overall life satisfaction, all other things being equal. They calculated that you would need a 40% raise to offset the added misery of a 1-hour commute. Seems like a lot. Use money to buy yourself better time, says Professor Dunn. Don't buy a slightly fancier car so that you can have heated seats during your 2-hour commute. Buy a place close to work so that you can use the final hour of daylight to take a ball around in the park with your kids. Another way to buy yourself time, Professor Dunn says, is by outsourcing tasks you dislike. Whereas hiring personal assistants used to be the preserve of the wealthy, it is now easier and more affordable to hire freelancers and virtual assistants online to help you with either regular administration or just individual tasks. She's currently doing research on how people actually spend the time they save by outsourcing tasks and whether it makes them happier. The preliminary findings, she says, are that most people do become happier by buying time for themselves, but only if they use the time in the right way. Our hypothesis is that people will be much more likely to derive an emotional benefit if they think of it as windfall time and use it to do something good, rather than just taking it for granted, she says. But while buying time is a good idea, putting a dollar value on your time may not be. In another piece of research in progress, Professor Dunn is finding that when people think of their time as money, it makes them less likely to spend even small amounts of time on things that are not financially compensated. Seeing as time as money may have a number of destructive consequences, she says. We gotta be getting close. We are. Okay. We're in the home stretch. Money only brings happiness up to a point. When looking at all of these research results, there's an important caveat to bear in mind. Those in the field divide happiness into 2 components, and you need to have both parts working together to be truly happy. But only one of those components keeps improving the more you earn, the other tops out after a certain point. First measure of happiness is evaluative. Professor L defines it as a sense that your life is good, you're satisfied with your life, you're progressing towards your life goals. That's the measure used by economists Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson, who have conducted extensive research comparing economic data and happiness surveys across the world. They're both excellent Twitter follows as well, if you guys like to follow economists on Twitter. We found very clear evidence that in just about every country around the world, rich people are happier than poor people, says Professor Wolfers, and people in rich countries are happier than people in poor countries. The other component of happiness, affective, looks at how often you experience positive emotions like joy, affection, and tranquility, as opposed to negative ones. Explains Professor L. You could be satisfied with your life overall, but you may not actually be happy at the time, she says. Of course, happy people experience negative emotions, just not as often, so you have to have both components. Daniel Kahneman, who authors a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I would recommend checking it out if you're into reading these kind of things. But Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton of Princeton University found that when they looked at effective measures, happiness did not rise after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. They did, however, find a consistent rise in overall life satisfaction, matching results of Professor Wolfers and Stevenson. I think that paper has actually been debated a little bit, and there's been some other papers going against it. You can look into that further yourself if you'd like. I'm not super well versed on it. It just kind of rings a bell to me. Regardless, the bottom line, when you don't have much money, a little extra can go a long way because you'll have more essential needs to fulfill. As you accumulate more wealth, however, it becomes more difficult to keep buying more happiness. Don't get in over your head. Finally, keyword finally, although much of the research in this field is on spending money rather than saving it, the researchers agree that spending more than you can afford is a route to misery. Taking care of your basic needs and achieving a level of financial security is important. Professor Gilovic says that although his research shows that life experiences give more happiness than material goods, people should of course buy the essentials first. His findings hold true across a broad range of income levels and demographic groups, but not for people with very low incomes. Those people don't really have discretionary income. It pretty much all has to go on necessities, he says. Some studies, meanwhile, have shown that debt has a detrimental effect on happiness, while savings and financial security tend to boost it. A survey of British households found that those with higher levels of debt reported lower happiness, and a separate piece of research on married couples showed that those in more debt had more marital conflict. Savings are good for happiness, debt is bad for happiness. But debt is more potently bad than savings are good. From a happiness perspective, it's more important to get rid of debt than to build savings. So before you go out and spend all your money on a dream vacation, make sure you've taken care of the basics, paid off your debts, and have enough money to shield yourself from the worst of life's troubles. Financial advisors are actually right, Professor Howell says. The first thing you should be doing with your money is building up a safety net. You go into debt to buy these great life experiences, the stress you'll feel when the credit card bill comes in will probably wipe out the good that you got from that experience. That was a mouthful. I do have a chart I want to draw and something to add. But first we'll see what our junior tutor has to say. The actual question was, and this was more of a psychology article than an economics article, but what does this article suggest to us about how people should go about truly maximizing the level of utility from the limited incomes? And our junior tutor. So the article tells us about the relationship between income and happiness, whether or not money is the reason for happiness. It says so, as per Professor Howell, Associate Professor of Psychology at San Francisco State University, is of the opinion that material purchases offer better value for money because the experience is fleeting and material goods last longer. On the other hand, the paradox of money is that although earning more of it tends to enhance our well-being, we become happier by giving it away than by spending it on ourselves. So there have been different experiments to know where money can buy happiness or not. Some say it should be used for safety. Some say savings are good for happiness. According to some researchers, spending more than you can afford is a path to misery. So in order to maximize their level of utility from their limited incomes, the person should plan their expenses, spending on the basic needs first, and then concentrating on savings and managing the funds according to limited resources, so as to live a comfortable and happier life. In other words, budget, pay down your debts. Once you've built up a nest egg, make some charitable contributions, as you'll feel good about it. And vacations are good too. That's 10 seconds of an article that took me 20 minutes to read. The part I have something to add about here in particular is this line here. Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton of Princeton University found that when they looked at effective measures, happiness did not rise after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. So what that kind of relates to is diminishing marginal returns. So our happiness does increase as our incomes or our money increases. And this, when you chart it and kind of talk it through, it makes pretty intuitive sense. So on the y-axis here, we'll have utility. So it's going to be utility. And this is going to be, call it quantity of money, I guess. Basically, this is the amount of money somebody has, or they're making, etc. And the graph is basically going to look like this. It's going to go up pretty steeply at first, and then it's going to tail off. Pretty steeply at first, and then it's going to start to tail off and approach being flat eventually. So what this study is saying, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, is basically saying that this point here-ish, is kind of the point where like additional household income isn't making a huge difference to happiness. So that's like 75K. And you can think about it, if you are somebody with absolutely nothing, zero money, and not to say that people with no money at all are not happy, but as we just read about for a very long time, happiness does increase with income or money. So if you don't have much money and someone gives you like $5,000, so your quantity of money goes from 0 to 5K, that's going to open a lot of doors for you. Doors that weren't previously open. Ignoring, our social security measures being, welfare, food stamps, etc. If you go from, in this ultra simplified example, if you go from $0 to $5,000, your utility is going to increase by quite a lot, by this amount here, because you can now do a lot of things you weren't able to do before. I mean, with $0, you, again, simplified example, can now afford food. You can now afford some shelter, some better shelter than you could have before. Whereas on the other end of the scale, when you have, you know, $995,000 and you earn another 5,000, you give it another 5,000, whatever. And you're now at $1 million. We can see the corresponding line adds very little to your overall level of utility or happiness, because when you have $995,000, an extra 5,000 doesn't really allow you to do anything, experience anything new than what you had before. So that's why there's diminishing marginal returns to happiness, and this coincides with this paper by Kahneman and Deaton, in which they saw that happiness did not rise much after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. And again, that paper is disputed, but generally this is the economic theory behind why that is happening. All right, moving on to question 2, 25 minutes into this. Click this, right?